India, a study in profile by Lieutenant Colonel Javed Hassan, published by the Services Book Club 1990. Now, this book was very important and had a great impact on the Pakistani military thinking. This was sponsored by one Major General M. Amin Khan Barki, the Commandant of the Command and Staff College Quetta, and published by the Pakistan Army Services Book Club in 1990-91 and distributed to all officers. Before that, in I think 1987-89, Colonel Javed Hassan wrote a series of articles titled India, a Study in Profile in the Citadel Journal of the Command and Staff College Quetta. Now, General Amin Khan Barki introduced the book as following, quote, "It had been felt for some time that studies on India, while covering many of the tactical, organizational and doctrinal aspects, left a void as far as the personality and the minds of the Indians were concerned. It was as important to understand the Indian personality as it was to know Indian concepts and organizations. Lieutenant Colonel, now Brigadier Javed Hassan, was assigned the responsibility to undertake just such a study which would unfold the mystery and enigma that is India. It took him 3 long years to complete what has turned out to be a well-researched and fairly voluminous work." Unquote. Contrary to later scapegoating of 4 Pakistan Army officers as the Gang of 4 for the Kargil blunder or the Kargil battle of 1999, as this Command and Staff College Quetta sponsored book of 1990-91 proves, that gross underestimation of India was part of Pakistan's collective military psyche as early as 1990-91, 8 years before Kargil battle took place. India Study in Profile was a study conducted for the Faculty of Research and Doctrinal Studies, Command and Staff College Quetta, and distributed to all Pakistan Army officers by the Services Book Club in 1990. The book's organization is as following. Part 1 is titled India's Heritage. It includes 4 chapters, first being geographic setting, second the historical perspective, third the military legacy, 4 the ideological heritage Hinduism. Part 2 is modern India, which includes chapter 5 the Indian polity, chapter 6 the economy, chapter 7 psychosocial profile, chapter 8 the security compulsions, chapter 9 foreign relations, and chapter 10 military instrument. Now, firstly, the book has many factual mistakes which a study of this caliber and level could easily avoid. Just shows how ham-handedly Colonel Javed Hassan did this work, and from a directing staff of the Command and Staff College, I mean, this is not expected. Now, like on page 20, he says, "The ineptitude of Babur's son Humayun led to the success of Sher Shah, but Humayun, with the help of the Persian king, was able to regain his kingdom from the descendants of Sher Shah at the Second Battle of Panipat." Unquote. Now, this is nonsense, because Humayun defeated Sher Shah's descendants near Karnal, and when the Second Battle of Panipat took place, Humayun was already dead. On page 21, again he makes ham-handed statements, like he states, quote, British eventually emerged victorious when they captured the strategic gateway along with the capital of Delhi in 1857. Unquote. Again, this is nonsense. The British, rather the English East India Company had captured the capital Delhi in 1803 from the Marathas, and 1857 they had merely recaptured the capital after about a siege of about 4 months. So these mistakes were entirely avoidable. Now we go on to the next chapter, and the military legacy, repetition of old things, nothing very interesting. Now, where he starts underestimating the Indians and Indian civilization, makes very sweeping statements, and I'll just quote to you some of his sweeping judgments. Like, he says, it's very interesting. On page 202, there is a heading, the psyche, national character, will and morale. Now, he states one of the Indian characteristics. I mean, it's shocking coming from an instructor of so-called very high-class intellectual of Pakistan Army. Like in a subheading, he says, deceit and hypocrisy, page 208. Now, he states, in chapter 4, dealing with Hinduism, this aspect, that is, deceit and hypocrisy, was highlighted with the observations of those who lived for long among the Hindus. John F. Kennedy, as President of USA, observed that Nehru's visit to Washington was the worst head of state visit he had, and described his conversation with Nehru as like trying to grasp something in your hand only to have it turn out to be just fog. So this is nonsense sanctioned by Furad's staff college Quetta. Another trait of the Hindus he describes, again, totally illogical, and I don't know how he comes to these conclusions. One of the traits of the Hindus and Indians, he says, is inability to sustain reverses. I didn't see that in Kargil when the Indians counterattacked and retook Kargil. I didn't see that. And Javed Hussain was there. He was the commander who sent about 500 or 600 Pakistani soldiers to death, pointless death. Now, Javed Hussain states, as the Hindu believes his leaders, in bracket Brahman, and his soldiers, Kshatriya, to be great heroes, there is the shock of frustration once it is discovered that they are not, with irreparable damage to the nation's psyche. In most of India's wars, says Javed Hussain, of the pre-independence past, retreat and breakup of all order on the battlefield was due to death of the leader. Now this is true for any army. The morale deflates to a degree of losing faith in the entire arrangement. After the initial reverses during India's China War, Krishna Menon, defense minister, in replying to question as to where the Chinese would stop, said in utter despair, the way they are going, there is not any limit to where they will go, unquote. Now, India and China was no match. But the bottom line is that Colonel Javed Hassan in this book grossly underestimates Indian will. Like he states on page 210, India has willed itself into becoming a nuclear and conventional power of some standing, but this may not be a reliable indicator of the strength of India's will. Now, Javed Hassan makes false and dangerous conclusions. Like he says, the confidence that was gained after 1971, partly courtesy Bangladeshi nationalism, seems to be giving way to a new kind of fear. Pakistan's modest acquisition of weapons from USA and the long overdue but normal modernization of our armed forces is unnerving a country which after the 1971 war was sure of its dominant regional status. In the Sri Lankan affair, during the Jaffna operations, more than a dozen COs reported sick and had to be removed from battle. Such behavior on the part of seniors is a poor testimony of national will and morale. Now, this is very shocking, and Javed Hassan's nonsense was, it was legitimized and it was promoted by the Command and Staff College Quetta, and this book published and distributed to all army officers. Now, what Javed Hassan states about the Sri Lankan affair, now I interviewed Brigadier Z.A. Khan, a noted Pakistani military analyst, and his book also was distributed to the Services Book Club, to all army officers, around I think 98 or 99 or 2000. Now I interviewed Brigadier Z.A. in March 2002, and describing the Pakistani attack in Khemkaran, the Ahmad Dev attack, Z.A. told me, and it was published in his interview in the Defense Journal as a cover story, that 4 out of 5 Ahmad Regiment COs in the first Ahmad Dev literally collapsed. 2 out of 3 brigade commanders suffered some kind of nervous breakdown, and the GOC was also non-operational. So, morale breakdown can take place in any army. But Javed Hassan, he singles out Indian Army. As a matter of fact, when I read this book, I was in the armor school. I wrote a letter to Command and Staff College Quetta, which was published in the Citadel Journal in 1991, in which I critiqued Javed Hassan for making false conclusions. But I think Javed Hassan knew how to serve. He became a general, and in 1999 he was commanding the FCNA division when the Kargil fiasco took place. Now, on page 256 he states, there is a growing awareness that the officers of the Indian Army are degenerating. And then he quotes General Sundarji, who said, quote, as a whole, the corps of officers has lost much of its self-esteem, pride and elan. It is becoming increasingly careeristic, opportunistic and sycophantic. Standards of integrity have fallen and honor and patriotism are becoming unfashionable, unquote. Now, as far as I understood when I read this book in 1991, the same was the case with the Pakistan Army. But I don't know how Javed Hassan was forming these conclusions. Now, in his conclusion, he says, the tangible component of India's military instrument have been covered in the last chapter. These have to be related with other national environment factors like geography, history, polity, economic sociology and national policy, which were all the subject matter of the previous chapters. A logical sequel to all this should have been an evaluation of the military instruments' performance in India's war since independence. As explained earlier, such an attempt was not a part of this work. This book was a focus on the character and personality of India. If the contents of the book are of some help in sizing up the socio-economic and politico-military facets of India's personality, then the purpose behind the whole exercise had been fulfilled. This is the conclusion. Now, the dangerous impact of this book was that it multiplied and accelerated overconfidence and exaggerated perceptions of Indian weakness in the Pakistan Army Officer Corps. Naturally, an army officer who was distributed this book in 1990-91 was maybe a colonel or a brigadier or a general in 1999 when the Kargil fiasco took place. Now, the interesting part is that a directing staff of Staff College does a political analysis, whereas ideally a military analysis should also have been done. Now, as far as I studied the Indo-Pak wars, and Javed Hussain could have analyzed it, it was not a big deal. That both Indian and Pakistan armies were total failure in offense. They were outstanding in defense, which is an easier form of war, simpler form of war, and they were total failures in defense. Like at Gadgore on 8 September 1965, Indian 1st Armored Division, commanded by a totally paper tiger general, Rajendra Singh Sparrow, and a totally incompetent brigadier called Khem Karan Singh, they failed to outflank Pakistan's 25 cavalry, who had just 2 tank squadrons with 4 tank regiments. So this is total incompetence. Similarly, Pakistan's 1st Armored Division at Khem Karan in the same time period, from 7th to 10th September, miserably failed to outflank a weak Indian force of tanks, which they were outnumbering by 7 to 2. So both the armies were a miserable failure in attack, and both the armies were top class in defense. Javed Hussain, I think, should have analyzed the military part first and then the political part. Now, when in 1999 the so-called Kargil operation was launched, as far as I can conclude, the Pakistan army was suffering from a crisis of overconfidence, which was created by characters like Major General Javed Hussain and books like India, A Study in Profile, were a dangerous exercise in instilling a false feeling of overconfidence in the officer corps, which totally proved to be ill-founded and fallacious and incorrect, as proven by the events of Kargil. So this book and this mindset needs to be studied, and in the future, Pakistan needs to avoid such conceptual pitfalls and blunders, and let's hope that some lessons are learned by somebody. Thank you.